Welcome to Courtyard Conversations. I'm your host, Jalen Jackson. And in today's episode, we're joined by Aundraea Brown, a licensed master social worker in Texas and a passionate advocate for mental health access. With a background in social work and as a clinical director of counseling and preventative services at Uplift Education, Aundraea leads a team providing crucial mental health services in Dallas schools. Not only that, but she's also one of our PhD students here at the University of Texas at Arlington School of Social Work. How are you today?
I'm well. Thanks for having me. That's the first time I've been introduced like that. So thank you. That
It's
felt
no
really good.
problem.
Thank you.
It's no problem. You deserve it.
Thank you.
Given that about half of UTA's master's social work students complete the program online and our MSW program is consistently ranked number one among the best in rankings, how did the MSW program here prepare you for the PhD program?
It was phenomenal. I actually was one of the first cohorts to be a part of the Fort Worth campus. And it was very intimate.
Mhm.
So it was a smaller cohort of us, maybe about 15 to 18 students. And the instructors I had, incredible. And then also, what was really integral, I believe, to my development as a social worker was the internship process.
Mhm.
So I interned at a behavioral health, mental health hospital, and that fully prepared me to be effective and efficient going in to mental health in the schools after I completed
Mhm.
my MSW program. But I got a lot of support. I enjoyed UTA. It's no wonder I'm back as a doc student. So I tell everyone this program shines, and it's because of instructors and the high quality education that I received that I'm where I am today. So
Okay.
definitely huge shout out
That
to
makes
UTA.
sense. But I saw you didn't do your undergrad at UTA.
I didn't.
What brought you to UTA for the MSW and for you to even still be here?
I did. I looked at other programs within the state and I just gravitated towards UTA. I came, I visited the campus. Then I liked that intimate setting
Mhm.
with the Fort Worth cohort. So that just kind of led me to come here. I graduated with my BSW from UNT, but
Mhm.
UTA was incredible. So
Yes, ma'am. So, um, what what can you tell us a little bit about your research and what led you into it?
mhm, mhm. I have been in a social worker for about 10 years. My most of my social work experience is in school-based mental health, so school social work. And it's twofold. So growing up, I I'm dark skinned. I have a big nose, I have an afro. Like I struggled a lot just with my self-esteem, my own mental health growing up. I didn't exactly have the words to
Mhm.
identify what I was navigating until I got plugged into a small group at my school. So I didn't know this, but they were passing around surveys and we were supposed to identify different things that we were struggling with. I thought it was going to be anonymous,
Mhm.
but thankfully it wasn't because that got me plugged into a support group at school where I was able to connect with other students like who were experiencing some of the same issues that I was.
Mhm.
And that's what led me to actually become a social worker because the social worker that connected with us, he was phenomenal. I didn't realize that I was learning skills to like understand my emotions, my feelings, and to develop a better self esteem, but I was in a fun way.
Mhm.
And this was something my parents are great, they're phenomenal, but we didn't talk about like our emotions, our feelings. So I didn't have the vocabulary or just the understanding to talk about that with anyone. So that just opened the door to, oh, okay, I'm going to do this when I
Mhm.
get older to help people who are like me. So as I began in the school setting, I started working with some phenomenal families actually in the Stop Six Poly area in Fort Worth, which is a beautiful area. I love the community, some of the nicest people I've ever met. I'm originally from the Dallas area, so sometimes it can be a little rivalry between Dallas and Fort Worth, but I'm
Mhm.
sorry, Fort Worth was amazing. Anyways, these kiddos and families that I was connecting with were going through a lot of significant struggles. And some of the kiddos that I met with were apprehensive to engage in counseling, but I started going to their basketball games. I started going to their soccer games. I'm saying hey to them in the hallway, trying to like break through that barrier of kiddos being okay with talking to a counselor and even talking to families. They were a little hesitant, but they were like, oh, my kiddos talk about you. They like you. So I was able to connect with them, but I understood that there were just some stigma, some barriers to
Mhm.
kiddos and families still, even, 20 years later, from when I was that little girl struggling with her mental health,
Mhm.
like these kiddos are struggling with their mental health. So I'm like, okay, it's been this gap. I have so many questions.
Mhm.
Like, why is the stigma still here? Why is it challenging for communities that are predominantly Black and brown? Why is it just this access gap?
Mhm.
Why are there not services that I can connect them to? So I had all these questions and I'm doing my own little research. It's not official research, but I'm like trying to get access to articles and looking. I had all these wonderings. So I said, I'm going to apply to the
Mhm.
doc program. And that's what led me back to UTA. And I have just enjoyed the journey coming back and exploring like some of these barriers and gaps and answering the questions I have and then hopefully illuminating voices and then being able to support
Mhm.
initiatives that can benefit and close those gaps.
Okay, that's pretty cool. You got
Mhm.
introduced to social work on accident.
Right, right.
Most people have like they're introduced by like an event like whatever they go through as a kid, like with parents and things like that. And that's
Mhm.
how
Yep,
people are like, oh, CPS,
I know.
social work is CPS. But it's so much broader than that. And as you learn more, it's just crazy to see how much social work actually is rather than just CPS.
That's so true. That's so true. Because when I started at the school, some of the parents were, "Oh, you're a social worker?" Sometimes I was nervous to say I was a social worker, but I was like, "No, I'm a social worker. I'm going to change the narrative.
Mhm.
We are here to help." So yeah, you're exactly right. A lot of people receive services that are mandated
Mhm.
through maybe they've gotten into trouble and they're like into the the justice system and are mandated to get services. So you're right. Yeah.
So one question I have is, from your perspective, what is the current state of mental health and wellness access, particularly for people of color?
Mhm, mhm. I'm going to respond specifically about Black people.
Hmm.
That's what I'm currently researching now and in the literature in now. And what we're finding is like all races, ethnicities are navigating mental health concerns.
Hmm.
That is true across the board. What we're finding, or what we know, is that there are certain historical aspects or certain historical traumas that impact Black people. Because when you think about historical trauma, it's the pain that people who look like you have experienced maybe generations before you.
Hmm.
So thinking about some of the hardships that Black people have went through, whether, that's enslavement, the civil rights era, social justice, Jim Crow, even seeing, just in the media, unarmed Black men being killed by police officers or authority figures or different things like that, that impacts the well being and the mental health
Definitely.
of a community of people. Just seeing that and going through that hurt and that pain. And there's research that's coming out that's showing that historical trauma can live within generations
Mm.
for like 6 generations. So think about, our great 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 grandparents or
Goodness.
yeah, and they were enslaved
Hmm.
or, maybe they couldn't use a certain restroom. So that like lives inside of us. Also along with our excellence, our resilience, that's there, but we can't negate the fact that there's pain and intergenerational trauma that exists.
Mhm.
So that's compounded just with the complexities of just day-to-day life
Mhm.
of being a person. Like,
That's true.
you're going to experience stress, you're going to experience challenges. So right now, I think all of that is compounded. And then post-pandemic, if we're
Mhm.
post-pandemic, it's hard to know.
Mhm.
Post-pandemic, like we went through a pandemic through COVID, that's challenging. We saw an uptick in mental health concerns. And then while we were having that medical pandemic, there was also the Black Lives Matter movement that was starting. And we were seeing visuals of, the George Floyd,
Mhm.
even before that, Philando Castile, like on and on and on. We're seeing those images, and it just definitely impacts your well-being. So I would say the state right now is compounded with a lot of other different things that Black people are just navigating, and then not necessarily being able to seek help
Mhm.
or not knowing how to seek help. We're finding they're just barriers or disparities that exist.
And I've actually read that, you know, most people would there's actually like I remember, growing up growing up as an African American is like a lot of the older generation doesn't believe in the whole mental health thing.
Mhm.
So it's like as times are changing, it's like you're seeing the shift of, okay, mental health is important.
Right.
Um what are your thoughts on that, on how the shift of mindsets about mental health in the Black community?
Yes, I definitely think it's shifting. I can understand why maybe our parents or even some people are still struggling with the stigma there because like we just heard a lot of themes in our life of like we have to work twice as hard, like we
Hmm.
have to like this resilience and grit, and sometimes mental health concerns can be seen as a weakness or maybe it's just not brought up in conversation a lot. And so someone may think they're struggling by themselves. I'm like, this is a normal thing that a lot of people are going through and there's help. It is definitely a shift. I think social media has contributed a lot to just the awareness.
Hmm.
Even the advertisements that we see, it's everywhere. Celebrities are talking about mental health and wellness and well-being, and they're just safe spaces that have sparked everywhere on whether it's Facebook or Instagram or places where we can connect and learn more about well-being and wellness spaces and how to access care. So I definitely see the tide turning, which is good
Hmm.
news. It's good news.
That's great.
Mhm.
Are there any specific statistics that stand out to you um,
Mhm.
when highlighting the disparities in mental health outcomes?
Yes. So there was a study and it found that about 25, I would say about 25% approximately, um, Black people were reaching out for mental health services and support. And if we see that across races, mental health concerns are pretty much the same, right? Everyone is experiencing mental health concerns, but 25% are reaching out when compared to white people, it's about 40%. So you
Hmm.
see the gap, like 25% are seeking or receiving services,
Hmm.
and then compare it to white people, 40% are seeking and receiving services. Just trying to understand why that disparity is there.
Hmm.
Something else that we're noticing, so I work with primarily school age kiddos, but we're
Hmm.
noticing that kiddos under 12 now are experiencing more suicidal ideation or suicidal behaviors, which that is more thoughts about not wanting to live or even maybe acting on attempting on those thoughts or even dying by suicide. So never have we seen this group of students like 12 and under experiencing more deaths by suicide than their peers. So
Hmm.
that's research that's just emerging and just want to understand why. And what they're noticing is that there was no outcry of I'm having these thoughts, I'm having these struggles. It was just unfortunately they died by suicide. So there was no time to sort of like mitigate. I'm sure there were signs there, just maybe were missed, unfortunately. So that's emerging.
Mhm.
We're seeing that now.
And what do you think, you know, set that set that turn to
Mhm.
where it started affecting younger people
Yeah.
more?
Yeah. That's a great question. I I'm wondering because in some research that we were doing with the younger kiddos, since we're knowing that this is emerging, I work with a phenomenal mentor here at UTA. Her
Mhm.
name is Dr. Harrell. She's fabulous, the epitome of sponsorship and mentorship. Something that I would wish upon any doc student. But her research directly aligns with some of my research like areas. So I'm like, this is great. We get to work together. But what we notice is that kiddos are experiencing like bullying and peer victimization, which is just like some pain from peer to peer.
Mhm.
So whether it's teasing or some violence or aggression there. And they what's showing up in Black students may be some aggression or maybe some withdrawing behaviors. If a student is withdrawing, okay, maybe there's other high needs things I need to work on. Maybe I
Mhm.
just miss it. I don't notice that they're not as talkative or engaging or interactive.
Mhm.
And then if a student is navigating some stressors like bullying, etc., and they're more aggressive, maybe it's okay, well, maybe we need to take the discipline route. We
Mhm.
need to maybe suspend or like we're going to get on to them because their behaviors are more aggressive or explosive when
Mhm.
really these may just be outcries of I'm struggling internally.
Mhm.
I need some help. I don't know how to say it because I'm younger. Like I don't have sometimes the communication skills to say that I'm not well,
Mhm.
So I think maybe that's why we're seeing that. And if we can get educators or mental health professionals or parents in the schools to recognize these risk factors, then early on we can intervene. And so I think maybe they just don't know how to communicate, and
Mhm.
then people don't know what signs to look for. So that's been some of the research that we've been working on and what the implications we've uncovered thus
Mhm.
far.
Definitely. I can see that because I remember we
Mhm.
talked about that before. Where uh people look at a child as, oh, that child is bad, that child is troubled, but
Mhm.
they don't look at why necessarily.
Exactly. Exactly. Exactly.
So it's a battle. It's a battle, but I think and I hope that it'll get better over time with people realizing that mental health is serious and it doesn't just affect teenagers and adults.
Exactly. Exactly. If we can catch them young and build up the mental health skills
Mhm.
and vocabulary and self advocacy, just imagining how their life trajectory may look different
Mhm.
in middle and high.
Definitely.
Mhm.
Um, in your experience in research, what do you think are the barriers and challenges faced by African Americans in accessing mental health resources? I'm sorry.
Mhm. Mhm. There's a lot of layers to it.
I definitely understand that.
Just, what I've seen in research is just the physical access. And, I'm from a community that's predominantly Black, and the resources that I see when I
Mhm.
like Googling or just in my community, as far as like mental health support and wellness support, it's not as prevalent as other communities. Sometimes I'm driving an hour and a half just to get to like, decent park, like green spaces,
Mhm.
wellness spaces, which I'm really interested in the intersections of mental health and how being active and being in nature and how that plays a part in someone's well-being and not even having that access to it.
Mhm.
So I know that plays a part. Just physically, there's just not as much in areas that are more populated by people of color. And then it's the you just kind of grown up in
Mhm.
a certain way. So even just thinking about wellness access, I just started hiking and I never knew anybody who looked like me who hiked and camped or any of that stuff.
Mhm.
And I asked my grandmother, I was like, why didn't we go outside and go to parks and go in natures? Because I'm originally from Monroe, Louisiana, and they have
Mhm.
like these beautiful pines and sometimes we would go for family reunions to the park. That was it. And I was like, Grandma, why didn't we go? And she said, there's a particular park called Caroli Park, stunning. She said,
Mhm.
well, we weren't able to go when I was growing up because we were Black. So it just
Mhm.
kind of stuck with me. I didn't experience that. So that's sort of some of that historical intergenerational trauma that shows itself. And for me,
Mhm.
I'm like, oh yeah, I don't go to park. I don't do nature. But it wasn't until the pandemic that I started exploring, excuse me, some of those other things. And so like we're starting to unlearn, I think,
Mhm.
some of the things that we used to adapt. Like can't blame my grandmother. She was
Mhm.
adapting to what she had. So I think sometimes we have this mentality of, and Black people aren't a monolith, right?
Mhm.
Obviously, we're all different. But just from my experience and experiences of others that we're learning, is that sometimes you just have to unlearn some things and start to understand like that there is help and there is support. And I can put a name to, oh, maybe I'm not just tired, or maybe I'm
Mhm.
not just uninterested. Potentially, is this depression? Oh, I'm nervous and I'm like, oh, I'm jittery. Maybe I'm experiencing anxiety. So I think it's just about some unlearning and us now being able to put words to things.
Mhm. That's real.
Hmm.
That's
Hmm.
definitely real because man, when you unlearn, it's like I don't know, it's like a weight lifted off your shoulders
Hmm.
because
Right.
now you know how to navigate and express what you need to. So, how do cultural, socioeconomic, and systemic factors contribute to these obstacles?
Mm, yes. I mentioned some of the just like the physical barriers, which I just can't access it because it doesn't
Mhm.
exist. But culturally and structurally, I think again, like sometimes it's when you're in a system or you're part of a community or system that's continued to sort of like push down
Mhm.
on you, and you've had to, so to speak, fight like this resilience. Like Black people show resilient. It's
Mhm.
amazing. It's like we have overcome so much and we have this grit,
Mhm.
this tenacity about ourselves that it can be easy to get in this grind culture.
Mhm.
So, some research coming out now about just rest, like just being able to rest, and Black people tapping into that
Mhm.
instead of leaning on, no, I have to work hard, I have to work hard. Sometimes we hear, I can sleep when I'm dead. Like, no, your body needs to rest. You need to be well. That's a part
Mhm.
of your wellness and you being able to sustain. So I think it's because of those structural, social, cultural systems
Mhm.
that have been put in place that can be challenging for folks to delve into that. And then I think too, just being able to connect. I think about just personally, I said my parents and they're wonderful parents. If they're listening to this, they're great. We just did talk about, emotional stuff. And it wasn't until I called my mom and I was just having a hard time. I was like, I'm struggling with my mental health. This is what's going on. And it was the first time she opened up. She said, even though I'm a social worker and I can reflect back and think, oh, she was struggling with some things too. But she was able to communicate that.
Mhm.
But it was because I created a space for her to feel like she could share too. And so it's that culture of it's okay to talk about some of these what we may consider taboo topics,
Mhm.
like even saying like suicide or saying like I'm struggling with, I've had thoughts of not wanting to live. So I'm having conversations with my friends. Even we're opening up the conversation and they're sharing like some struggles they're going through. I'm like, okay, that sounds stressful.
Mhm.
Now I'm not their counselors, right? We can't
Mhm.
counsel our friends, okay? But I'm like, that sounds stressful. I mean, maybe somebody navigating that, maybe experiencing depression or having thoughts about not wanting to live. Like, do you feel like you're thinking about that?
Mhm.
And so you're opening up the conversation. And I think sometimes we have a culture where, understandably so, we can't talk about those things. But
Mhm.
now, like, we're starting to have more of those conversations. I think that has been pivotal in the kiddos that I work with and the counselors that I manage who work with other people. Like, just opening up that dialogue and that conversation and education and awareness has helped.
That makes sense.
Mhm.
I literally I even me, I'm like I grew up like I'm like, "Oh yeah, I'm
Mhm.
tough. I'm all right. I'm all right." Then one day I was struggling so bad with my mental health. I called my mom, and that day I didn't know we had access to mental health services. But
Mhm.
turns out my family had a therapist, for a mental health therapist
Oh.
already. So
Mhm.
like I never knew that. So when I told my mom, she was able to get me help immediately.
That's
And I
good.
started going to therapy and stuff like that. And it's so crazy because it's just like all I had to do was say something.
That's right. Mhm.
And I my whole time, like, I was in college, and this was, like, during the pandemic.
Mhm.
I was in college, and, like, during the whole time, I never knew that, you know, this was as serious. I didn't know that my family had access, or we were able to just get to it that easy
Right.
until I said something. So I feel like that's part of, like, those things that you have to unlearn, like,
Mhm.
just trying to be tough all the time and
Right, right. Because saying that, that was huge, and it
Mhm.
just opened the door to you being able to get support and services. But it's challenging, like,
Mhm.
when you've been taught, like, "Oh, I'm strong," especially, I mean, as a Black man, like, just seeing everything y'all navigate and go through, it can be challenging to feel like you can say that.
Mhm.
So, yeah, that's yeah,
Definitely.
yeah.
Are there what do you believe are the, stigmas surrounding inequities in, mental health, and wellness access?
Mhm. I think this is more of the same,
Mhm.
right? Just sort of the ideals that we come to know
Mhm.
based on our experiences, whether that's individually or just the historical intergenerational
Mhm.
things that, there's also just stigma on healthcare,
Mhm.
which is kind of closely related to mental health, understandably so, because of
Yeah.
different research that has gone on. One of the most notable was the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, where
Mhm.
Black participant, if you could even, whew, just
Yeah.
shudder to even call it a research study, but they were not getting the care that they needed to get better, and then
Mhm.
undergoing all of these torturous treatments under the guise of they were thinking that they were getting care, when care was so simple,
Mhm.
right? Even something as simple as penicillin that would have been cured. But I think just that mistrust and like
Mhm.
skepticism is still there too. And then also feeling like someone is going to connect with you.
Mhm.
The mental health field professionals, Black people are also underrepresented in as mental health professionals. I think psychologists, 2% are Black. So
Mhm.
I know that statistic.
That's a very low
So
number.
I know. So sometimes you may want a counselor or therapist that has similar background or ideals. So no matter race, some people may want someone who's a Christian or has those values, or somebody may want to speak with a man or a woman. And if you're unable to connect with a therapist that's Black or that's important to you, that may be challenging.
Mhm.
This isn't to say that just because you're Black, you could provide competent services, but there may be this idea of, oh, I don't have to explain certain things,
Mhm.
or I may feel uncomfortable sharing this with someone who doesn't share my identity. So I've seen that be, a stigma or a barrier.
Yeah, that's a thing too, because I know it is harder. I mean, it's really weird, but you tend to gravitate towards people who look like you and
Mhm.
that you feel like they've experienced some similar things. Um, so now now that we've talked about stigmas, my question is, based on your research, what recommendations do you have um for addressing and overcoming mental health inequities?
Mhm. Mhm. So in the study that I engaged with my mentor when we uncovered that, oh, there is a connection between the younger students experiencing suicidal ideation or thoughts about suicide and experiencing bullying and issues with peers. There's also this could be this mitigating factor of like school connectedness that
Hmm.
can support students. So I think just what I would say is connection within the school setting, educators or mental health professionals being aware, cognizant of like students presenting with maybe heightened emotions
Hmm.
or they're just like you mentioned, like sometimes we want to label them as this is just isn't a good kid.
Hmm.
Well, maybe they're just struggling
Hmm.
with their mental health. And we notice that sometimes with Black students, especially Black boys, they're overly disciplined and suspended and expelled. And that leads to like the pipeline to prison.
Hmm.
And then we see that in prisons is mostly Blacks. And like we make up what, 13 or 14% of the population, but 40% or so of the prison population is Black. What we're
Hmm.
finding is a lot of them have unaddressed mental health concerns. So if we could rewind the tape
Hmm.
and funnel students to support their mental health, what type of impact that may have on their life longevity. So I think that that's a huge piece. And then also just that connection piece,
Hmm.
whether it's, you just with your friends, like you shared about talking to your mom and just like making mental health language just like comfortable
Hmm.
and being able to talk about it so that we can point folks to care. And then there's just a lot of services out now that make things easier. Like instead of calling 911 when someone has a mental health emergency and it may be challenging when you have officers present and you're nervous and that can be very triggering for some folks in the Black community. We have 988 that you can use.
Hmm.
So I think just all of those different virtual spaces and now we have mental health podcasts and we
Hmm.
have all these ways for you to engage that's just benefited the access and has definitely mitigated some of the barriers to support.
Yes, ma'am. Are there
Mhm.
any specific strategies or initiatives that you've discussed that show promise in improving access for the Black community?
Yes. Well, I don't know if shared it,
Well,
but I definitely think about I'm a little biased because I work in the school setting,
hmm.
but there's definitely a lot of promise to just school-based mental health programs. Like at the charter school network I work in, we have some phenomenal counselors
Hmm.
that only do mental health support. They don't do the scheduling and the testing, and they're trained mental health professionals. Like they're master's level competent social workers or counselors or licensed professional counselors working in the school setting. So kiddos, what we're finding when they receive mental health support, they're most likely to receive it from school. So we can beef up those services, which I think we have. And we've seen a surgence even around the DFW of like mental health professionals working in schools. And I also think like UTA
Hmm.
has our CAPS department, our counseling and psychological services department, where we can access those services. I've accessed them before as a student. They were easy to connect with. And it's programs like that that closes the gap to access because everyone can get to it essentially.
Hmm.
And then I think also just the virtual space and the safe spaces and the grassroots organizations that are popping up that are well versed in like how do we support Black folks who are navigating or how do we support people of color who are navigating mental health challenges.
Yes, ma'am. I think that's pretty cool to. I think that's pretty cool that that I went blank.
Hmm.
I went
Hmm.
blank,
Hmm.
but I think I can remember. I think it's pretty cool that um things are starting to change in
Right,
in
right.
schools.
Mhm,
Because I remember, you know, growing up, a lot of teachers and people in the schools, they wanted you to be right educationally all the time. But like,
mhm,
it didn't used to be a thing to care about mental health in school.
mhm,
And the fact that you brought up, uh, you know, you see it in school, like the
mhm,
best way to gauge it is in a school. I
mhm.
think that's a very interesting fact.
Right. Right, yes, and some of our educators, listen, they have a hard job. They have been so integral because they see the kids every day, and they're like, "Oh, this kid, something seems off."
Mhm.
And they have, like, just a little bit of understanding, and most have gone through, like, trauma-informed training where they're able to, like, spot, like, "Okay, I'm gonna refer you to the counselor," or just having a conversation, "What's going on?"
Mhm.
So they have been phenomenal in connecting kiddos and families to, like, adequate care. So schools have definitely been a supportive place for sure.
That's great. That's great to see
Mhm.
how that's transformed.
Mhm. I know. You and me both. It was different, right? We were growing
It's
up.
very
And maybe in some places, they're still navigating those
Mhm.
challenges. So that's my hope that we can scale what we're doing in some of these schools. I'm thinking of mine. And, like, how we can, research that and see its effectiveness and scale it to other communities.
Yeah, it's funny. You said I was thinking
Mhm.
about my I
Yeah, I
mean,
was
it's
like,
good to have a bias towards your school. That means you care.
I do. I love what I do. I do. I'm one of the lucky ones, the blessed ones, where I
That's
love what
great.
I do every day.
That's great. That's great.
Mhm.
Because if you love what you do, it's not work.
That's what they say.
um, so how does addressing mental health inequities uh impact communities of color on a broader scale?
Mhm. That's good. I think we have just the healing that can take place. It's needed.
Hmm.
I feel like Black excellence is a thing. Black folks, all people deserve healing
Hmm.
because, right, we all have mental health concerns. I just think Black folks have gone through a lot within America, and there's some restoration that needs to take place. And on a broader scale, if we can support the well being of Black people to make sure that we reduce this access barrier, it's just, I mean, the sky's the limit. I'm just thinking about, like, the students that I've worked with who have experienced just some awful things.
Hmm.
And if they could just get plugged in to the support that they need, whether it's community support or in a school, I just think about their health outcomes, their well-being outcomes. I think about, myself as a
Hmm.
little girl. And, like, now, I talk about struggling because I was impacted by colorism and different things like that. Now, I'm obviously healing and healed from that. I love my complexion, the way I look, and things like that. But it was a journey
Hmm.
that thankfully I got to experience and go on. But again, it's like this gap. Not everybody can, but if on a broader scale we can close that gap, the healing that can take place and the restoration that can take place with other people, I just think that would that's just my life's goal.
Yes, man.
My life's goal is to see that, right? No
Hmm.
barriers to Black healing or to healing of people in general.
Hmm.
So,
Okay. Um. So, what action steps or initiatives do you recommend for people who want to
mhm,
contribute to the cause?
that's good. Individually, I want people to just know that it's okay to, like, reach out for
Hmm.
support and help. It's there. Sometimes there's some barriers to getting to it, but it is there and it's what they deserve. It's what folks deserve. From, like, a structural standpoint, just businesses that are offering these services, like employers that are offering, like there's an employee assistance program where you get access to mental health services, or like at universities you get access. I think that that is important.
Mhm.
And then people who just want to get involved, like start by having conversations like this, like connecting with other people, saying, "Hey, how you doing? How
Mhm.
are you?" Like, and leaning in with a sense of wondering and not being afraid to share their own stories, because there's power in that. Like when I share my story, that helps people to say, "Okay, I'm not alone. This isn't wild thinking. I'm not making this up." This gives me sort of the push to talk about my story too. So
Mhm.
getting involved with like grassroots organizations, getting involved in community, mental health, really in like well-being and wellness is a communal, community-based thing. It has to be. Because if I set boundaries, I need my community to help me like either follow them, or if I am like, oh, I don't want to be the only person out here walking. So I'm grabbing my friends, like, hey, I know we've never hiked before, we've never
Mhm.
camped, but let's do this. Like, let's have conversations. I even went to a birthday party, one of my cohort members. It was a fabulous party. She talked all about Black wellness and well-being, and she had open dialogue with a group of people, and it was powerful. So
Mhm.
just stepping into those conversations and making mental health the norm, like, "Oh, my back hurts." I can also say, "Oh, I'm just not feeling good. Like, I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling." So just making that common language, I think, would be a powerful tool for folks to start doing.
Okay. And can you suggest? I know we talked about a few resources, but can you
Mhm.
suggest any specific resources for our listeners to get
Mhm. Mhm.
involved, or even just here on this campus?
Yeah, yeah. Definitely CAP services if you haven't leveraged them. Blackwellness.com is a great resource. And there's so many
Mhm.
podcasts. Like they're flowing in my head, but I can't think of any of them. But it's just so much content out there that's quality, good content
Mhm.
for sure. And 988, text not it. Listen, if you're struggling and you just need to text somebody, you can't text a friend, 988 is great. I've even sent them a text and I'm like, okay, yeah, this is what I needed. So just not being afraid to step out on that, but there are resources there. Mhm.
Okay. And how can our listeners um apply the insights that you've provided
Mhm.
in their everyday lives and in their communities?
Mhm. I think just something really you illuminated, but just like reaching out and feeling comfortable to reach out. I know sometimes it can feel awkward or
Mhm.
uneasy. I think if folks are struggling and navigating, I would say reach out. And then I would also implore them to reach out and have those conversations. And then just getting involved. There's a lot of community based mental health networks and supports doing their own educational healing journey, learning about mental health and exploring those concepts and unlearning some things and learning
Mhm.
some new things, and just just relishing in their own healing journeys. I would encourage everybody to do.
Yes, ma'am.
Mhm.
Thank you. Well, I
Mhm.
think that's all we
Yeah.
have for today. If you want to learn more about the School of Social Work and what social workers do, please go to our website and follow our social media pages. And please be sure to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and turn on those post notifications for more content down the road. As always, everyone, please be safe and make sure to check on your friends. Until next time, Jalen Jackson signing